Faith is often spoken about as if it's the highest human virtue, as if believing without proof makes you noble, as if doubt is weakness. But when we strip away the comforting language, blind faith isn't a virtue at all. It's a shortcut that bypasses reason, evidence, and self-reflection. Blind faith means handing over your judgment, your ability to ask questions, your freedom to doubt. And when millions of people are trained to do that, the consequences ripple far beyond personal belief. They shape societies, laws, conflicts, and even how we treat one another in the smallest everyday interactions. It's tempting to see faith as harmless, a private comfort that doesn't really affect anyone else. But history and psychology tell a very different story. The danger of blind faith is that it doesn't stay private. It becomes the justification for power, for violence, for control. And it all starts with that one idea, that believing without evidence is something to be proud of. Consider the most obvious examples. Wars fought in the name of gods, holy lands, or sacred texts. The Crusades, the Inquisition, the 30 Years' War. Each of them was powered not by reasoned negotiation, but by conviction that our faith is unquestionable, therefore our cause is righteous. Faith allowed killing, torture, and oppression to be seen not as crimes but as duties. And it isn't just in the past. Even today, extremists across the world take lives while convinced they're serving a higher purpose. Their certainty comes not from evidence or logic, but from blind trust in authority, in scripture, or in tradition. That's the problem with blind faith. It makes people immune to reasoned argument. If you believe you already possess the ultimate truth, why listen to anyone else? But it's not only on the battlefield or in politics where blind faith does its damage. It seeps into medicine, into education, into the everyday decisions that determine life and death. Take medical refusal, for example. Parents denying their children life-saving treatments because their religion teaches that prayer or ritual is better than science. There are documented cases where children have died from easily treatable conditions, simply because faith told the parents to ignore doctors. When belief is more important than evidence, the results can be fatal. Education is another arena. In some communities, evolution is dismissed, climate science is denied, and entire generations are raised with a distorted view of reality. Not because the facts aren't there, but because blind faith overrides the facts. A child who grows up being taught that questioning is dangerous is being robbed of one of the most essential human tools: curiosity, the ability to ask why and to follow evidence wherever it leads. The irony is that blind faith often presents itself as a source of certainty, a stable foundation in an uncertain world. But real stability doesn't come from shutting your eyes and clinging harder to what you've been told. It comes from being able to adapt when new information arrives, to change your mind when the evidence demands it. Blind faith is brittle. It can't bend, so it breaks. There's also the psychological side. Blind faith encourages people to separate the world into insiders and outsiders, the saved and the damned, the chosen and the rejected. This division fuels prejudice, discrimination, and dehumanization. When you are convinced that your group has the truth handed down by the universe itself, it's easy to look at everyone else as less than fully human, less deserving of rights, less deserving of compassion. History shows where this leads. From witch hunts to pogroms to modern hate crimes, blind faith has again and again created an us versus them mentality that justifies cruelty. Not because people are naturally cruel, but because faith has told them their cruelty is righteous, that their obedience is moral. What makes blind faith especially dangerous is that it short-circuits the very process that could prevent harm: doubt. Doubt is what makes us pause and reconsider. It's what makes us check our assumptions. It's what protects us from following destructive ideas too far. When doubt is cast as sin, we lose the internal safeguard that might have saved us from error. There's also the matter of authority. Blind faith doesn't just mean belief in unseen gods. It often translates into unquestioning obedience to those who claim to speak for those gods. Priests, imams, pastors, gurus. Once faith is accepted as a virtue, these figures gain immense unchecked power. And history shows that unchecked power rarely ends well. From scandals of abuse to financial exploitation, Blind trust in leaders has allowed countless harms to go unchallenged. But beyond the obvious dangers, there's something subtler. Blind faith dulls critical thinking in everyday life. If you've been trained to accept extraordinary claims without evidence in one area, it becomes easier to accept dubious claims in other areas too. This is why belief in miracles often sits alongside belief in conspiracy theories or pseudoscience. It's not a coincidence. It's the same habit of mind, valuing conviction over evidence. And when entire societies operate that way, the consequences add up. Public policy can be driven by ideology instead of reality. Resources get wasted on rituals instead of solutions. Opportunities for progress get missed because people are clinging to stories instead of facts. The collective cost of blind. Another way blind faith shows its danger is in how it warps responsibility. If a person believes their actions are guided by divine will, then accountability shifts. They no longer see themselves as the agent of their own choices. They see themselves as instruments. "I was only obeying God" has been used as a defense for actions ranging from the petty to the catastrophic. That's not just dangerous, it's disempowering. If people are convinced they don't truly own their decisions, how can they fully grow morally or intellectually? True responsibility means accepting that your choices are yours, not dictated by unseen forces. Without that, moral development stalls. Another subtle cost of blind faith lies in how it reshapes our relationship to truth. In ordinary life, truth is something we test. We measure, compare, and revise. If new evidence comes along, we adjust our understanding. Faith short-circuits that process by treating certain claims as untouchable. They are placed in a protected category where no amount of evidence can touch them. That's how contradictions survive. Consider how many believers accept modern medicine but reject evolution, or embrace the internet while still holding that ancient scriptures contain the final word on reality. This isn't consistency, it's compartmentalization. And it happens because blind faith demands that some beliefs be held immune to the tools we use everywhere else. The philosopher Bertrand Russell once pointed out that what we need is not faith but reason tempered with imagination. He argued that faith leads us to hold on to beliefs without evidence, while reason allows us to shape beliefs around the evidence we do have. The difference may sound subtle, but in practice it's the difference between progress and stagnation. Progress depends on questioning, on saying, "This explanation doesn't fit the facts, let's try another." Every discovery in science, every reform in politics, every breakthrough in human rights happened because someone doubted the dogma of their time. If those people had relied on blind faith, they would have stayed silent. Humanity would have stayed stuck. We often underestimate how many things once justified by faith are now recognized as cruel or absurd. Slavery was defended from pulpits. Women's subordination was preached as divine law. Segregation, censorship, and even wars of conquest were blessed with prayers. In each case, blind faith allowed people to see injustice as duty, and only when people challenged faith with reason did change begin. But blind faith doesn't only harm society, it can quietly eat away at the individual. A person who feels constant pressure to silence their doubts often experiences guilt and fear. They live with the anxiety that questioning might lead to punishment, not just in life, but in eternity. That kind of psychological burden can be heavy. Studies in psychology show that when people are forced to hold beliefs that clash with reality, they experience cognitive dissonance. The mind struggles to reconcile conflicting information, and often, instead of adjusting beliefs, people double down on them. The more the evidence mounts, the harder they cling. This is why arguing with someone who holds blind faith can feel like hitting a wall. The evidence doesn't matter because letting go of belief feels too terrifying. Yet, this fear is not natural. It's taught. Children are not born fearing doubt. They're born curious. They ask endless questions. They test the world with their senses. It takes training to convince a child that questioning is dangerous. That training is what blind faith relies on. And once instilled, it can take a lifetime to undo. Another overlooked danger of blind faith is how it distorts our sense of what counts as knowledge. In the modern world, we rely on collective expertise. Doctors, engineers, scientists, and educators all work through systems of evidence and peer review. But blind faith can make people suspicious of expertise altogether. Why trust doctors if God heals? Why listen to climate scientists if prophecy says the world will end anyway? Once faith undermines trust in evidence, it creates fertile ground for conspiracy theories and misinformation. This doesn't just affect religious doctrine, it spills over into politics, health, and even how we relate to each other socially. A society that prizes faith over evidence is vulnerable to manipulation. Leaders who speak with certainty, no matter how wrong, gain power over those who've been taught that certainty is a virtue. And history shows us how dangerous that can be. Think of cults. They are the distilled essence of blind faith. A single leader claims absolute authority, followers surrender their judgment, and over time, the results range from financial ruin to mass suicide. The tragic end of Jonestown in 1978, where over 900 people died, is a chilling example. They weren't unintelligent. They weren't naturally self-destructive. They were caught in the web of blind faith, convinced that obedience was salvation. And cults are not as distant from mainstream religions as people like to believe. The same mechanisms are at work: unquestioned authority, sacred texts, the suppression of doubt. The difference is scale, not kind. Even outside of extreme cases, blind faith erodes something fundamental: intellectual honesty. It trains people to start with the answer and work backward, to defend a conclusion at all costs rather than follow the evidence wherever it leads. And that habit of mind doesn't stay confined to religion. It spills over into how we handle disagreements in general. How do you argue with someone who's decided in advance that their position is untouchable? Dialogue becomes impossible. Compromise becomes impossible. And so conflict. The deeper danger of blind faith is how it limits the human imagination. At first glance, faith looks like it expands imagination by inviting us to picture heavens, miracles, and unseen powers. But in reality, it narrows imagination because it declares certain answers final. If the origin of the universe is already settled by a story in a sacred text, then curiosity ends there. Exploration stops. The imagination is boxed in by what is permitted to be believed. Contrast that with what happens when we let questions stay open. The history of science and philosophy is not a story of having the answers from the start. It's a story of building, correcting, and discovering. The telescope didn't confirm a sacred story, it shattered one. The microscope didn't reinforce dogma, it revealed a hidden universe of life. Curiosity has given us more wonder than blind faith ever could. Another overlooked effect is how blind faith creates moral shortcuts. If morality comes pre-packaged in commandments, then people don't learn the skill of moral reasoning. They follow rules, but don't necessarily understand why those rules matter. This is why you can find people who are kind and generous, but whose faith still leads them to condemn others for who they love or how they live. They aren't reasoning through the ethics. They're obeying rules without question. True morality, the kind that grows out of empathy and reflection, requires more work. It requires us to consider the impact of our actions on others, to weigh evidence, and to revise our principles when they cause harm. Blind faith denies that process. It insists the rules are fixed, even when the world changes, and so it ends up protecting the rule rather than the human being. This rigidity is what makes blind faith so dangerous in a fast-changing world. Problems like climate change, artificial intelligence, or global pandemics will require flexible, evidence-based responses. But when people cling to beliefs that are centuries old, they risk dragging us backward instead of moving us forward. The challenges we face cannot be solved with ancient dogmas. They need fresh thinking and honest debate. There's also the personal tragedy of wasted potential. When someone grows up under blind faith, their talents, questions, and insights may never fully develop. An artist may never explore themes their tradition forbids. A scientist may never ask questions their faith discourages. A young person may never live the life that would make them happiest, because faith told them it was forbidden. Every time that happens, humanity loses something. But the good news is that blind faith isn't inevitable. People break free from it all the time, sometimes slowly through years of questioning, sometimes suddenly when a contradiction becomes too obvious to ignore. And what they often report is not despair, but liberation. They find that doubt doesn't destroy meaning, it deepens it, that morality doesn't vanish without faith. It grows stronger when based on compassion and reason. The philosopher Karl Popper once said, "Those who promise us paradise on earth never produced anything but a hell." His point wasn't only about politics, it was about certainty itself. When someone claims to have perfect answers, immune from challenge, the result is oppression. The antidote is always the same: openness to questioning, willingness to test beliefs, humility in the face of evidence. What blind faith fears most is exactly what makes us human: the ability to change our minds. That ability is not a weakness, it's our greatest strength. Every step of progress has come from someone who dared to question, who dared to see that the world was not as tradition claimed, who dared to trust evidence over authority. Think about it. The abolition of slavery didn't come from blind faith. Women's suffrage didn't come from blind faith. Civil rights, medical advances, technology, the expansion of human rights, none of these were born out of clinging to dogma. They came from breaking free of it. And that is why blind faith is dangerous, not just because of the wars and crimes committed in its name, but because of the possibilities it prevents. Every time a person silences their doubts, the future loses a voice that might have discovered something new. Every time a society punishes questions, humanity loses a chance to grow. The real alternative is not despair or nihilism. It's a life built on curiosity, evidence, and empathy. It's choosing to value truth over comfort, even when truth is difficult. It's knowing that uncertainty is not a flaw in the human condition, but the doorway to discovery. Blind faith offers certainty at the cost of truth. It offers comfort at the cost of growth. It offers belonging at the cost of freedom. And in the end, those costs are too high. When we let go of blind faith, we don't lose meaning, we gain it. Because meaning built on truth is stronger than meaning built on illusion. Because compassion built on reason is deeper than obedience built on fear. And because freedom to question is far more human than submission to dogma. The danger of blind faith is real, but so is the possibility of living without it. A life where questions are not feared, where morality grows from empathy, where truth is always open to revision. That's not just safer, it's richer, fuller, and far more worthy of the human spirit.